Namaskar. We have with us Sebastian Coe, often called Lord Coe or Seb. Seb has worn several
I
hats.
actually prefer Seb.
You prefer Seb. Okay, we'll go with Seb. He has won several hats in his illustrious career as a champion athlete, winner of multiple medals at the Olympics, including two successive gold medals in 1,500 meters in the 80s and 84 Olympics, right? And
Absolutely.
and of course, two successive silver medals in 800 meters as well at the same Olympics. He then entered politics, and now he is a distinguished sports administrator who is the president of the World Athletics. So, coming to India Connection, Seb, your grandfather was Mr. Sardari Lal Malhotra, right?
He was.
Yeah, a prominent hotelier in Delhi. So, is there any India influence in your career as an athlete and then as a sports administrator that you can talk about?
I'm not sure that the influence in my career uh, is particularly focused on my Indian heritage, but my mother, whose father, my grandfather, was originally from the Punjab, as you've said, he was a hotelier in Delhi. The hotel still exists. It's the Marina Hotel in Connaught Square. Um, it's the hotel that my mother was born in,
Really?
and her sister. Yeah, and he started life as a lawyer, so he trained in London, and he met my grandmother, who was half Irish and half Welsh. So it's interesting. I have very little English in me, actually. She was half Irish and half Welsh. She danced with an Indian dance troupe. They
Mhm.
fell in love. They moved to Delhi, and the the marriage didn't survive.
Mhm.
And my mother moved back to London
Mhm.
when she was 10 or 11. But the Indian influence in my life has always been quite profound. Many days of the week, she would wear a sari,
Great.
and my cousins were, familiar features in my life because um, my mother's sister's husband, uh, technically my great uncle, worked for the India Foreign Services, was the permanent representative for India at the United Nations for many years.
What was the name?
Tinu Sen,
Okay.
and my cousin was also worked within the government in India. So the Indian influence was very strong. My mother would regularly come to India. She would spend a couple of months every year, and so for me, it's always been a part of my life. And actually, technically, because of course my grandfather was Indian, it would have been possible for me to have competed for India. And at one point, I did actually get dropped from the British team. And the Indian National Olympic Committee were not slow in reaching out and saying, you do know you have qualification to compete for India. But the International Olympic Committee and the British Olympic Committee were very clear that you did have to serve a 3, 4, maybe even at that point 5 year,
Cooling
uh,
off period or whatever.
yeah, a transitional period. So it didn't make a great deal of sense. But no, India has featured prominently in my life. My youngest daughter's middle name is India.
Yes, I've heard that. You did visit the hotel when you came here in 2019 or whenever it was, right?
Yes, I did. I very proudly have a photograph
I see.
standing outside the hotel, and actually it was under renovation when I went there, and it was quite a yeah it was quite an emotional moment to think that that was actually
The place of
um,
my mom's
the
birth.
birthplace of your mother. Yeah.
Yeah, and but you know about there is a lot of more history to this hotel than just that. You're aware of some of the
I
things.
am I am acutely conscious of that history. It's not a particularly lustrous history, but it's profound nonetheless.
Do you have relatives who are still in India?
Yes, I do. I have a an elderly aunt and
Mhm.
cousins that regularly come to India. So yes, and every now and again I get letters or communications from distant relatives who knew my grandfather well or were members of the family. So there's always something each year that expands my understanding of the family.
Interesting. So let's talk about the meeting with Prime Minister Modi.
Yes.
What were some of the key topics discussed with
Well,
him?
first of all, I was very pleased that he managed in a day from a day from hell for him in a way, because it was the opening session of the winter session of Parliament. I know that he had a big cooperative meeting to attend on the same day. And look, I was a member of Parliament and for a short period a government minister. Even at my modest level, I know what your daily calendar and diary looks like. And I was very, very grateful that he managed to find time. And my goodness, it was time well spent, because we talked about the importance of sport, not just on the field of play, but the impact, the social impact that sport can have, particularly the delivery of events that give amplification and volume in a way to that power. And we both agreed actually that athletics was in a sweet spot for that. It's probably one of the most accessible sports that you have. If you have a body, you're an athlete. It's incredibly inclusive. It's gender balanced, and it's a sport that contains shot putters and marathon runners. You couldn't have a broader bandwidth of physicalities and mentalities as well. And it's a unique sport. So we both agreed that alongside the Indian Track and Field Federation, our ability to stage more events was both beneficial to the growth of the global sport, because India is an extraordinarily important marketplace for us. You have the critical assets for a sport to prosper. You have a very important sports commercial marketplace. You certainly have the numbers, you have the demographics, and you certainly have, I think, a reservoir of untapped talent. I've met a number of world leaders, but I've rarely had a conversation that has focused so much on the importance of sport in society, and particularly the Kilo India initiative that is very much his, about getting the nation fitter, and also the national sports program that now runs on a biannual basis. All really important developments.
Coming back to talking about this Prime Minister again, because of our interaction with him have been quite intense on sports. And he has often talked about the role that sports can play in the nation's character building. Was there any talk around that?
Yeah, there absolutely was. And he quite rightly, we both agreed that one of the big challenges that will probably be a drag anchor on the ability of countries to be able to meet the economic challenges of being a global player is going to be the health and fitness, both mental and physical, of workforces. And the challenge going forward is that more and more of our global population are physically inactive. I think by 2030, something like a third of the nation, a third of the global population will be formally designated as physically inactive. And to put that into just a simple perspective, it means that a large proportion of your community are not physically able during the normal course of a day to see through that day in optimal fashion. It's, not actually, frankly, wanting to climb a flight of stairs. Now, that has a profound impact, I think, and we both agreed on that, in terms of added burdens to your healthcare system, patterns of illness that become prevalent maybe decades in advance of when they should. Young people in their 20s with diabetes and some preventable illnesses that normally wouldn't surface unless, in populations that were sort of getting towards their 60s. All this is a challenge. And I can't speak for India, nor would I want to, but in the UK, the sobering statistic here is that between the age of 8 or 9 and about 12 or 13, the average British child becomes 50% less active. And if you extrapolate that through to a situation where you've got that kind of pattern being set for the remainder of their lives, then you really do have the added burden that an aging population becoming less and less fit and demanding and needing more health care for illnesses that actually are preventable. Not every illness is a causality of physical inactivity, but my goodness, there is more than a link there. And we know whether it's heart and lung, whether it's stroke, whether it's certain types of cancers, whether it is certainly mental and cognitive skills. All these are complemented by having a nation that is fitter and healthier. In the UK, if you can shift the dial 0.5% on the nation's fitness, you can take it up literally at one fell swoop about $1 billion out of the national healthcare burden, and that's not a straight linear that's not a straight linear graph. That actually really becomes quite dramatic if you can even get a 1.5% increase.
And imagine if the same thing were to extend to the entire world. Look at the numbers and what is the kind of savings that can accrue for all the countries to put into other things which are more important and more pressing.
Well, yes, and also even when you've got healthcare budgets, you can be targeting things that are really that are posing you some big challenges, rather than actually just focusing your budgets on very reactive situations to patterns of health that really don't need to be as profound as they are. And this is, look, it was pleasing to hear a politician, a leader, talk in such long-term ways. I mean, we're all guilty of this as politicians. You tend to think about the next election, but I've been a politician. I know we all tend to think in terms of electoral cycles. It was comforting to listen to a politician, a world leader, talk about outcomes that probably won't come to fruition within his own remit as prime minister, and that's a good thing. We do tend to think rather short term, and it was comforting to hear somebody with such an embracing vision that was looking decades ahead, not just about the next electoral cycle. Of course, the electoral cycle is important. You want to be there to be able to implement those policies, but it's really important that you do think beyond the curtilage of the next election.
Was there any discussion on India's bid for the 2036 Olympics?
Yeah, we discussed. It was less about the bid for the Olympics and much more about the importance of big events. And I made the point that I've long since believed that the well-stocked shop window is the attractive way of getting young people into sport. I think you can have all the public policy aimed in the right direction. You can have all the initiatives through your health care agencies and departments of health. These are really important. But ultimately, you create a Neeraj Chopra, then that has the turbocharging impact that goes way, way beyond just public policy. And large events tend to attract young people into sport. I know that there are arguments that it sometimes puts young people off. I don't believe that. I actually believe that, look, I'm a really good living example of that. I'm now going to carbon date myself, but I was watching an Olympic Games many decades ago as a 12-year-old. I was watching it in the city of Sheffield. I was brought up in a northern industrial manufacturing town in the north of England, where my parents had a business. And I remember watching two athletes in my home city of Sheffield, John and Sheila Sherwood. John got the bronze medal in the men's 400-meter hurdles. His wife only just missed out on gold in the long jump. They came back to the city as conquering heroes. They took their medals around the schools. They came to my school in that tour. And I went out and joined an athletics club because what I saw on television during those games and witnessing, close at hand, even just getting a glimpse of those medals it changed my life that day. That's why I joined the athletics club. Much to their humor, I joined the rival club, actually. I thought I'd joined theirs, but I didn't know enough and signed up for the rival club, which they still to this day find very amusing.
Coming to your tenure as the president of World Athletics, if I were to ask you what do you consider your most significant achievement to date as the president of World Athletics?
I tend to think in 4-year cycles. Look, I have myself to blame because I changed the constitution to make sure that no president could serve more than 12 years, and we do it in three lots of 4 years. So I tend to think rather like I did as an Olympic athlete. I tend to think in 4-year cycles. So I inherited a sport that was not in good shape. And I'm not talking about what was going on the field of play, but I had a sport that my predecessors were frankly not running the sport the way they should. There was some corruption, there were some challenges which I inherited. So the first 4 years, really, and again, I'm pleased and proud that we did do this, was really putting the fire out, creating a new house that was built on far sturdier foundations than the previous one, rewriting the constitution, creating an athletic integrity unit that made all our dope testing independent from the federation. So we avoided any political interference, any interference from federations. We removed the concept that was frustrating the athletes, that if you were a big federation with deep pockets and with political contacts, you could probably avoid some of the testing challenges that countries that had, or athletes in countries that had less opportunity to do that. There did appear to be a rule for some and not for others. We changed that. We also introduced integrity rules and guidelines that made sure that all the members that get elected, including me, have to go through a vetting process every 4 years. And I guess the thing I'm proudest about was that on the field of play, we were a sport that has been gender balanced for many years. We've been 50-50 from the moment I put on a pair of running shoes and ran competitively. I've only ever been in a sport that had equal numbers of men and women, but that wasn't the case administratively. And so part of the reforms that we drove through that really re-engineered the sport made sure that constitutionally by 2027, all our governance structures had to be gender balanced. We had to be gender neutral. Nice. And that was important for us. And so 4 years in advance of that 2027 target, we actually got to the position where we have a 26 strong council. We have 13 men, 13 women. And I have to say it's a much stronger council for having that balance. So that was really the first 4 years. The next 4 years were dealing with all the things that I couldn't deal with in the first 4 years because the house was on fire. And so we're in a very interesting phase now, which really in a way has brought me to India because of the strategic partnership that we formed with Tata and their broadcast partners, HBS, in order to make sure that the innovation journey that I know our sport needs to be on to remain interesting and salient in the lives of young people, to attract more people in the way we've just talked about joining the sport and choosing sport as a way of life, all that is the innovation element in all that is absolutely vital. And this is where, in order to tell the story behind the athletes, to create the technology that allows people to know more about our sport, to see it more regularly, and to see it in marketplaces where in the past they've been priced out because TV rights have been so expensive, but at the same time, the quality has been questionable. All this we think we can really address as a challenge through our partnership that we announced today with Tata.
How interesting. I was going to ask you something along the same lines. Track and field events have started facing a lot of competition from emerging sports, right? What are the strategies that you have or you propose to maintain and enhance the appeal of athletics to modern audience?
Well, I'm pleased to report that actually athletics is probably in the best shape it's been in generations. I've been around the sport a long time as a competitor and an administrator. I've never been more optimistic about the future of the sport. It was only a few years ago that if we'd been doing this podcast then, you would have asked me, I can guarantee you would have asked me a question, which was, look, Usain Bolt has just retired. What on earth is the sport going to do? And my answer to you then would have been, look, there will be other athletes that come along. When Muhammad Ali retired, there was no one to immediately replace Muhammad Ali because Muhammad Ali, rather like Usain Bolt, are very unique figures. But there are still great athletes that have come along. And what I'm pleased to report is we've probably got more of them now in a bandwidth of discipline in both track and field and on the road that have really become box office. And many of them are very young. So they could be around, if you take Keely Hodgkinson, the female athlete from the UK who won the women's 800. She's barely 21. She could be around for a decade and dominating the sport. So we also have age on our side because many of these young athletes, I think, are going to go on to really create legendary status. And so we've probably got more than we've ever had. What do we need to do to enhance that? We need to use the type of technology that we know Tata can bring to the table about bringing the athletes to life. So often we watch sport and we get excited about it, but in a way they're magnesium flares. You see an athlete for a few days at an Olympic Games or a World Championships, and then, a few weeks later, we're all back to football, cricket, and other sports. So our challenge is to make sure our sport is relevant over 12 months of the year, not just for the few weeks of summer competition. We need to make sure that we use the technology that's now available to us to allow the kind of content that will bring the public and our fans into the lives of the athletes. We'll see behind the competition. We'll understand the extraordinary diversity of those competitors from 200 and something countries. We've got more members of World Athletics than there are members of the United Nations. And look, the audiences have changed. They're very different from what they used to be. They want information quicker. They want it more compressed, and they certainly want to be engaged more. They're not passive. They don't just want to sit there being fed one-dimensionally. Young people are watching sport. My kids watch sport, but they've got a secondary screen where they're absorbing technical information. If they watch Grand Prix, Formula One, or they watch cricket, they're immersed in numbers and data. And so this is something athletics can do a great deal more. And it sort of lifts the sport and becomes understandable. So much that is watched in sport, we watch at in a way, a superficial level. I think the next generation are going to be much more demanding about how they get behind the scenes. And that's why our innovation is really important. We also need to be very ruthless about our sport itself. The upside is that we're a sport of 150 years of history and philosophy, and we're certainly not wanting to ditch that. That's important. There have been some massive moments that have changed the direction, I would argue, of social policy, whether it was the Black Power salutes in the late 60s in America or Jesse Owens' resistance to the risible Aryan views of Adolf Hitler in 1936, or, even coming out of boycotts stronger than you went in. All these things have helped. I would argue that athletics has sat at the hotspots of some of these big social movements and social occasions. But we need to make sure that we are seen as a sport that is responsive and reflective of the world that we live in. And I think that will attract young people. One of the innovative challenges that we've set ourselves is, what does our sport look like? We have to be tough about what is attractive to our audiences and our fans, and what may be slightly past its sell-by date. Now, that's not the same as saying, right, well, one discipline is not popular suddenly, so we get rid of it. Our starting point is, how can we make it more relevant and understandable? And then you need to look at just the way people consume entertainment and sport. Our world championships are 9 or 10 days. As an athletics fan, I love absorbing stuff over 9 and 10 days. I'm one of those few people that still happily sit in a cricket ground watching a test match. Well, I say 5 days. They rarely go 5 days now. But so next in 2026, we're introducing something called the World Athletics Ultimate Championships. And this will be the top 16 track athletes, the top 8 field athletes. The field athletes go straight to a final. The top 16 track athletes go to a semi and a final. And it'll be 3 nights, 3 hours a night. And look, I'm unashamed about it. It is aimed at television. It is aimed at attracting new audiences, maybe audiences that have never watched athletics before, into our sport. And we need to be tough about how we challenge ourselves, because it's the old expression, isn't it? Change or be changed, and I'd rather be the change agent.
What is it that you have in mind for developing and promoting athletic talent in countries which have historically underperformed?
Look, it's a complex matrix, and I'm not going to pretend that I have straightforward answers here. In world athletics, we have a development program. If for sake of argument, we would think of ourselves, along with our world championships and all the other events that we stage, a medium-sized business. The bulk of what we actually make in our sport, through our sponsorships, through our relationships out there, the bulk of that goes back into our development program. So development is really important. Being able to identify federations that meet the needs and the criteria that you have just mentioned, those that have economic, maybe political, sometimes cultural challenges, those that are keen to develop, but we know they're not going to develop because there are some real challenges on the budgets and the purse strings. So making sure that we are funding those federations. I mean, we're not a poverty-stricken federation, neither are we international football. So, we have to cut our cloth a little more carefully, but making sure that we are promoting our development programs, funding projects that are quantifiable, that we are able to monitor and ultimately report back on, is really critical. It's about measurement. It's about meaningful, impactful programs. And it's through that system that you hope that your athletes are going to emerge. I think sport generally has to do more to actually make sure that the athletes are funded properly. And we have to also make sure that when those funds are available, that they are, where possible, aimed towards athletes and their development. Because, unless we have the high-profile competitors that are able to compete for column inches and airtime in the way that your top cricketers or footballers are, it's an uphill challenge.
Who do you think is your current superstar in athletics? If you were to name, he is the torchbearer of athletics worldwide right now. You know, you talked about Usain Bolt. Is there anybody who comes to mind now?
It's a great question, and I guess it goes back to what I said a few moments ago, that we have some very high profile athletes. Obviously, Mondo Duplantis, the Swedish pole vaulter that's now won everything that it's possible to win and getting on for winning everything that's possible to win on 2 occasions, breaking multiple world records and mercifully managing to do it when it's most difficult, which is in a major competition. And look, I could continue. We have athletes like Karsten Warholm, Inga Britson, obviously Eliud Kipchoge, who has swept all before him on the road. In female athletics, we've got Faith Kipyegon, we've got Sydney McLaughlin. I mean, we're very lucky and privileged to be in a position where I'm able to reel just those names off. We've got Noah Lyles, who is taking all before him in sprinting, and Julian Alfred, who just won in a lovely story. Comes from a population of less than 70,000. She's the women's 100-meter champion. So we've got some extraordinary athletes and some extraordinary stories to tell. So in a way, you can pick from any of those, and they're now beginning to dominate the headlines.
Nice. If I were to ask you, if you were to choose between the 2 roles that you have played so far, an elite athlete and a sports administrator, what has been more exciting and challenging?
You know, I would say I'm going to give. It's not a politician's answer, although it will probably sound like one. I've actually found both equally stimulating and challenging. And look, I think it's probably the quintessentially human nature. But as you move through various stages in your life, there are skills that you are gathering, which you may not even realize at the time, all lead to maybe 1 or 2 things. You know, when I was a competing athlete, I learned the priceless asset of commitment and determination and, withstanding discomfort and bouncing back from injuries, dealing with winning and losing in a sensible way, and working collaboratively with a group of world-class coaches. And from that, I understood the dynamic of building teams. When I left athletics and went into politics, which was an interesting transition, because I think a lot of people thought, well, I decided just to go from one high-profile role to another. I knew I actually wanted to be involved in politics far earlier than I knew I was going to be a successful athlete. And that was another set of skills. So having the competitive outlook, understanding the global nature of an international sport and coaching relationships, then building the experience through being a member of parliament, a government minister, and then a chief of staff in a political party, then gave me great insight into the next role that I took that was high profile, which was chairing the bid for London for the Olympic and Paralympic Games, and then delivering the games as the president of the organizing committee. So understanding the political landscape, trying to maintain the political balance in the UK so that the games never became a political football. Those were experiences and language that I understood, and the motivations of politicians, particularly as they were confronting elections, that I was able to navigate. Then in world athletics, having the first few years that were crisis-ridden, well, anybody that goes through politics knows that pretty much every day in politics you get thrown a crisis of some sort, and the ability to withstand those pressures. So in a way, the role that I'm seeking now probably has even more experience sitting behind it. I almost feel that I've been in training for it most of my life.
Thank you so much, Seb, for giving us the time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.